Al, what would you say are some of the sort of key either learning curves or things that you've learned that might be helpful for any church thinking about either a renew, a restart, or a merger?
Yeah, that's good. That's a good question. The first thing I've already mentioned, yeah, like you don't have to do it in a vacuum. Like there are good resources. There are lots of denominational people and classical and your neighboring churches that I think would love to be part of this. And so speaking of not being in a vacuum, I think it's when you begin to reach out, connect with other churches that all of a sudden these new initiatives take place. Take for what happened in Port Coquitlam with a new church that's there called Tri-City Church. And so this is a really interesting story. So a few years ago, Northview Church in Abbotsford bought this old church building in Port Coquitlam. They wanted to plant, but they're a big church in Abbotsford, and who are they going to send all the way from Abbotsford out to Poco in order to plant? However, a church in the same denomination, Crossridge Church, well, they had someone on staff, which is a church planting apprentice who actually grew up in the neighborhood of that church and would jump over the idea of planting a church in his old hood. And Crossridge Church had members who were driving from Poco to Surrey to their campus. And so they could actually send these people back to Poco. And then they reached out to Westside Church, who has a lot of experience planting churches. And so these three churches, Northview, who had a building and finances to invest in a church plant, Crossridge, who had a church planter and had people to send, and Westside, who had a model, a structure, a coaching system, experience in planting, these three churches decided to partner to plant a new church. And it wouldn't have happened unless people started talking and reaching out and communicating and seeing what each church could provide and give. And I think I could see that happening here. For instance, what would it be like for a few churches in the Fraser Valley, I don't know, to partner together and to plant a church or to help each other to replant or to experience renewal? So I think that's a possibility, is that those resources, or how do we embrace this new journey, is to begin to communicate and make relationships with other churches and see what partnerships can kind of percolate and come out of this. Which leads me to my last point, I think, in terms of how we can embrace this. I know a lot of churches are actually really cautious when it comes to church planning because there's this hesitancy, right? And losing people and losing resources and so on. But what I've experienced is actually the exact opposite, that I actually see church planting as an engine of discipleship, that people called to church plant, to be part of a church plant, grow as disciples of Jesus. They actually have to. In our church planting experience, there are many people that have stepped up into leadership positions. For instance, there's one person that used to come to Tap Richmond and used to come faithfully on Sundays, but sat in the back and wasn't really very much involved. And then when she heard that we were planting Tap Marple and she happened to have moved recently to Vancouver, she decided that she would move from being a bench warmer, and those are her words, not mine, to move from a bench warmer to be part of the starting team. So she jumped in, she started inviting people to come, she joined the leadership team, now is an elder of the church. That something about church planting and the newness, the excitement, the need to fill empty seats and so on, to engage the neighborhood, helps people become better disciples of Jesus. But not only that, discipleship happens then in the sending church too. That not only do people in the sending church hear these amazing stories of what's happening in their daughter church and gets motivated and inspired and so forth, but they begin then to jump into the liminal space that was vacated by the members who had left. So for instance, we have planted 3 churches now in the last 5 years. And our hope is always to send 72 people, if we can, to the new church plant. And so in doing that, we have lost a lot of good people. And so one of the hardest hits is our worship ministry. Because, you know, when you send lots of worship people and stuff, it's really hard to replace them. But what we have found is that new people come, young people step in, people we didn't know could drum can drum and are part of the team and be welcomed. And what happens that people step in and they step out, that people begin to reach out to others. People sometimes are more engaged with church. They move into leadership positions. They become discipled. That sometimes when a church actually goes to plant a church, they're the ones that actually grow. they get healthy and become more missional just because they do that. So I think there's some concern, and reasonably so, because you're losing good people and resources. But I do feel like, when you're generous and when you're giving and you're sending, God in his economy is generous and he provides and people come. And it's just this, yeah, um, really neat thing that happens, that when we step out in faith, sometimes God, meets you in that very much so.